Absolutely, Chairman. I see this, and I don't mind calling them out, but Captain Tory and Burkina Faso, as they know that both, whether it's their gold reserves, that is all those proceeds are just in exchange to protect the junta regime. There's a number of examples across. Even in Sudan, what's going on with the rapid support forces and in Burhan of the Sudan forces, when you get down to it, is all about the revenue that can be drawn out of that. And there are nefarious actors in the CCP and sometimes Russia are complicit in those activities.
Okay, well, you can't imagine how frustrating it seems to me that this mineral-rich continent has not been able to.
All right, Shalom. This is the brother Nahalia from the GMS Orlando camp. I want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rokakodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yashar Allah, and a sincere salutation to all Yuakim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwath, who are believing this word, in all truth and in sincerity. This is Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 4. Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. Yea, also because he transgresseth by wine, he is a proud man, neither keepeth at home, who enlargeth his desire as hell, and is as death, and cannot be satisfied, but gathereth unto him all nations, and heapeth unto him all people. All right, now I'd like to go into a lesson on this issue with Ibrahim Traore, all right, who is the captain or president over Burkina Faso. All right, now this story in particular with Burkina Faso and surrounding countries that kind of broke away from French colonialism has been a hot topic as of recent, because the general of AFRICOM, all right, which is basically a branch of, in a simpler form, is basically a branch of the military that has been instructed to surveil the African continent, which shows you that it shows you who's ruling the world. All right, the so-called white man, beginning with the elites, are ruling the world, and America is the spearhead, that golden city, all right, mystery Babylon mentioned in Revelation. Now, through America being the spearhead, all right, the so-called white man has been able to gather influence and heapeth nations unto himself, all right, through the G7, EU, NATO, these different economic agreements. All right, he's basically heaped all nations unto him. And this is why the U.S. government has military bases all across the planet, while having no other foreign military bases on their own homeland. It shows you who has rulership and dominion. Now, what's key about the clip that you saw of the general is that he's basically painting this picture and this narrative. All right, and before the so-called white man goes to war, he always creates this narrative where he's the victim. All right, and they're basically saying that Ibrahim Traore is basically taking gold or bribes from China and Russia. All right, he's stealing the gold from his own people. All right, and they're creating this narrative so that they can justify intervening in another nation's land and affairs. All right, this is why the scriptures say he neither keepeth at home. Now, I want to go into this because I have a few articles on it, because this is the so-called white man's MO. All right, what's been done in Africa is what they would term as neo-imperialism, where they don't bring in people, boots on the ground, rape, rob, and murder and pillage the people. All right, and then set up a garrison. What they do now is more hands off, if you will. They use the economic system, and then they use members of these nations. All right. What I mean by that is they set up leaders, puppet leaders, where they pay the leader billions of dollars so that they can pour trillions of dollars in resources out of the ground. This is why most of those African countries, the leaders of those nations, they'll have their money in these Western banks while their people still suffer and are poor. All right, because ultimately they've sold the resources from under their people and given it to these corporations. France was doing this for a long time with countries like Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso was able to break away The country of Niger was able to break away. I believe there was another country, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But these were countries that broke away from that. All right. And now they're being demonized on the world stage. And the reason this pops up in particular is because Ibrahim Traore, he mentioned either last week or the week before that France needs to return all the gold that they stole from them. And the French, first they lied and said, you know, the gold is from our mines, even though France don't have gold mines. All right. And then they basically tried to justify keeping it by saying, look, this guy's corrupt. He's just taking the gold for himself. And this is a lie. All right. And it's because they broke out of that French imperialist system that they're now being demonized on the world stage. And the same thing happened with Gaddafi. All right. So let's go here. All right. This is legalafrica.org. It says, from Gaddafi to Traore, Africa must unite against neo-imperialism. All right. It says, in a world where African resources continue to fuel global prosperity, yet Africans remain locked in poverty, injustice, and foreign dependence, the time has come for a new Pan-African awakening. The recent U.S. congressional hearing where General Michael Langley of AFRICOM admitted that U.S. trained soldiers have gone on to lead coups, including in Burkina Faso, has reignited urgent conversations about foreign interference, hidden agendas, and the manipulation of Africans' sovereignty. Now, this happened again, remember, with Gaddafi. He was trying to unite those African countries, all right, and actually be able to capitalize off the resources. What the so-called white man won't tell people, especially in the West, is that in order for capitalism on a global scale to continue to work, they still have to pull those resources out of the ground in Africa for pennies on the dollar, which means what? Africa has to remain economically poor and dependent. So what they do is they go to these countries and they set up leaders who are either willing to play ball or they assassinate ones who are not. And this is why I believe it's the 19th attempt on Ibrahim Traore's life. They've attempted to assassinate him 19 times since they broke away from France. All right. And this is the so-called white man's MO. This is why, all right, contrary to what these other camps are talking about, identifying who Esau is on the earth is a priority concerning prophecy. You have to identify the son of perdition. Now, what Esau, the so-called white man, has done, he's highly organized his form of criminal activity and wickedness. So to the naked eye, it looks like it's on the up and up. It looks like it's not wicked because it's so highly organized and it comes with suits and soft words. But when you look at the actions, it's treachery. So right now, what they're doing is they're spinning the narrative on Ibrahim to demonize him, to justify going in there and having a regime change. All right, because whenever these leaders don't play ball, they'll assassinate them and set up another leader that they know will play ball. All right, because what Gaddafi also wanted to do, all right, and what other African countries have tried to do in the past is nationalize their resources. And what that means is that instead of selling your oil straight to Exxon, all right, for pennies on the dollar, you set it up so that you sell your oil at retail price. And then when the government collects those profits go to the commonwealth of the people, meaning better train stations, more roads, all right, better welfare systems, free education, free healthcare. Things like that can happen if you nationalize your resources. But what that means is that the corporations who are used to getting those resources for pennies on the dollar will have to pay more, which means it cuts into their profits. And this is why they're willing to kill these African leaders who don't play ball. This is the part they don't tell you on mainstream media. They say Africa is poor and their leaders are corrupt. Well, who's paying these leaders? If they're so poor, they're not paying each other. That means some so-called white corporation is paying pennies on the dollars to keep these corrupt leaders in place so that they can make profits. And this Ibrahim Traore is an example, just like Gaddafi, of leaders who have stood up and refused to stand with thieves and robbers. All right. Now, how long he lasts is we'll see. You know, but this is another example of the so-called white man's treachery, and it's now being called out through the spirit. You know, matter of fact, before I continue, let me go here. This is Wisdom of Solomon 1, and I'm going to jump down to verse 9. Matter of fact, let's start at verse 8. All right, it says, therefore he that speaketh unrighteous things cannot be hid. All right, neither shall vengeance when it punisheth pass by him. For inquisition shall be made into the counsels of the ungodly, and the sound of his word shall come up unto the Lord for the manifestation of his wicked deeds. And this is what's happening. See, now it's being brought back to the scriptures. Because you have people like Scott Ritter, certain whistleblowers, they'll tell you the West and the corruption of the West. But you have to go back to the biblical understanding of who we're talking about. It's not just the West, it's the so-called white man as a nation of people. All right, the French are doing it. All right, the Australians are doing it. All right. It's not just the ones in the West. It's not just the Americans. It's the so-called white man as a nation of people. And he's used a very sophisticated system to hide his crimes. But now they're being exposed. All right. And Africa is one of those key places where you see that happening. All right. Because, again, when you deal with this recent congressional hearing, General Langley, all right, is over AFRICOM, which is basically a part of the military that is designated to surveil, all right, and basically intervene and interfere for the U.S. interests in Africa. All right, it's a branch of the military, and this is why they have a general over that branch called AFRICOM. All right, where they intervene, all right, they back certain people that support their interests. And this is the so-called white man neither keeping at home. All right. But this shows you that there's a sophisticated form of treachery and imperialism that's still going on while they're telling the world that all of that colonialism shit was in the past. It's not. It's still happening. All right. Now let's continue. It says Burkina Faso, a gold rich but often overlooked West African nation, is now on the front line of a new ideological war. Its young leader, Captain Ibrahim Traore, has dared to do what few in this age have had the courage to attempt: shake off the remnants of colonialism and challenge the imperial structures that still linger through international diplomacy, military alliances, and aid dependency. All right, and you have to keep in mind, all right, for those who don't know, with Burkina Faso, when they kicked out the French, they immediately went to the Russians, and they went to the Chinese to start making deals. All right. And they're not telling you this on mainstream media because, again, they're painting this narrative to demonize him. But since he's been in, he started to do building programs for his people. All right. Expanding the train, the roadways and the train stations to connect cities for more trade, highways. He's trying to build a plant so that more of his people will have electricity. And that's exactly what he's supposed to do with the resources that are available in his country. Use those resources to better the lives of those people. Where most of those corrupt so-called African leaders, they get in power and they enrich themselves. They put their children through private school. They put their children in schools in the West, and they get this higher education while making sure that the people don't have access to those resources. All right. And then they'll put out there that these so-called African countries are corrupt, but you're paying them to be corrupt. And they won't tell you that part. This is why this is the so-called white man is the devil that the Bible speaks of. Devil going into diablos. All right. Which means deceiver. All right. Adversary. All right. Now, this is a country that's rich in resources. They should be able to capitalize off of it. But if they do, then that means people on the West don't get things at the same price. All right, now let's go here. This is Psalms chapter 37 and 35. It says, I have seen the wicked in great power and spreading himself like a green bay tree. Yet he passed away, and lo, he was not. Yea, I sought in him, but he could not be found. All right. So what we see is the so-called white man, through the system he's created, he spread himself, all right, like a green bay tree. Yet he's going to fall. All right. His plan, his enterprise is going to be destroyed. Thus saith the Lord. But these are those little details that show you and reveal who the son of perdition is on the earth. All right. Now, when you deal again with the history of why Burkina Faso is in this conversation, is because they asked the French to give them their gold back. All right. And the French basically refused. They first tried to claim that they got the gold from their own mines, and there's no gold mines in France like that. But they're basically refusing to give Burkina Faso their gold back. And Ibrahim, the leader, basically said that if you don't give us our gold back, we can't do business with you. And this is why this is his 19th assassination attempt. And that's what the so-called white man does, particularly in Africa and South America, when you do some history and do some research. They go into these countries, they make deals with the leaders for loans that they know they can't pay back. And when they can't pay them back, they have to give up the resources in that land. And if you don't want to take that deal, if you smart and you don't take the deal, they'll kill you, all right, or set up some opposition against you. And that's the dark side of capitalism in the so-called white man society. And he's not telling the world that in order for him to stay rich in these different countries, these different European countries, this American empire, all right, places like Africa have to remain poor. You have to be able to pull those resources out for pennies on the dollar. And what happened was, let's go to this article real quick. All right. This is the rise and fall of Francafrique. All right. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. But it's Francafrique. All right. And I'm just going to read a little bit of this. It says, for more than 60 years, France sustained neo-colonial dominance over its former African colonies in the form of policies collectively known as Francafrique. The rise and fall of Francafrique is a story of hubris, greed, and neglect that today resonates globally as the geopolitical consequences of French failure in Africa come home to roost. All right, now I want to jump down to the policy. All right, it says the term Francafrique, French Africa. Oh, Francafrique. All right, I believe that's the term. Francafrique. The term Francafrique describes France's relationship with its former colonies in sub-Saharan Africa, encompassing a wide range of overt, covert, formal, informal, and clandestine activities involving political, economic, and military activities that collectively serve to define French neocolonialism in Africa. Francafrique did not happen in a vacuum, nor was it announced as formal declarative policy on the part of France. Instead, Francafrique emerged as a byproduct of Cold War realities where the French need to project itself as a global power in the face of the decline of its empire in the aftermath of the World War II coincided with the policies of the U.S. to contest Soviet efforts to establish a presence on the African continent. Francafrique emerged as the result a de facto continuation of French post-colonial influence in Africa that simultaneously served as a bulwark against Soviet expansionism. All right, now let me get some of the tangibles. All right, I'll read this paragraph, a little bit of this. It says, one of the mechanisms of control used by the Africa Cell was the so-called franc zone, a monetary control mechanism imposed by France on its West African former colonies that permanently pegged what was known as the West African franc to the French franc and euro subsequently. To ensure this convertibility, the involved nations were required to deposit half of their foreign exchange reserves with the French treasury, an act that effectively subordinated their monetary policy to France's. This French domination of the monetary policies of its West African former colonies helped facilitate the export-import trade with France, something the Africa Cell used to its advantage by creating a hand-picked African political and economic elite who would, through informal business connections, determine who would benefit from its streamlined relationship. Because of the informal nature of these relationships, oversight was lacking and corruption was manifesting throughout, leading to the enrichment of a select few in France and the West African states, and the impoverishment of the majority of the populations of France's former African colonies. All right, so you get an idea of what Burkina Faso and countries like it were dealing with before Ibrahim Traoré got into office. He basically broke away from this system, all right, and he went out to the Russians, all right, and that is prophecy. All right, let's go to Ezekiel 38. All right, because the Lord told what? Let's get it. Ezekiel 38:1, and the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. All right, and this is referencing, all right, Russia, because Russia now abides in a land that originally belonged to Gog, all right, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, all right, which are Japhetic names. But Edomites reside in that land. All right, the Russians are Edomites. Just like the Americans, the Germans, the Australians, they're still Edomites. And the Lord said, what? I'm against thee. Yet the Lord is setting up the Russians to be a guard against, all right, the Edomites in the West. And this is why when Ibrahim broke away from France, he immediately went to the Russians. Because the Lord said what? All right, let's continue. Verse 5, Persia, all right, which is Elam, all right, dealing with Iran. All right, and India's gonna go eventually. All right, right now they're playing both sides, but eventually, you know, they're gonna do what they need to do. Ethiopia and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomar and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. All right, and verse 6 is going into Turkey. All right, verse 7 reads, Be thou prepared and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them. All right. And the reason I'm bringing this out is because the moment that Burkina Faso broke away, they began working with the Russians. And it goes the same way for Niger and the other countries that broke away from the Franc-Afrique system. All right. Because you had a number of countries that broke away from that French system, that French colonial system, and they immediately went to China and Russia. All right. And this is prophecy. This is why eventually war is going to happen. Right now, you see a bunch of scattered proxy wars, the West versus the East, certain economic wars, certain proxy wars. But it all boils down to the big players in the game, the West versus the East. All right. The Eastern Edomites, meaning the Russians, and the Western Edomites, meaning the Americans and the European countries. Eventually, it's going to equal up into war. But what you see happening with Africa in particular, Burkina Faso, is an example of what the so-called white man has done, all right, in modern times. He's demonized certain people for his own advantage. Whenever somebody stands up against his system and whatever he's trying to do, he paints them out to be the bad guy or a terrorist. And then he either pays people within their country to rise up against their own government, or he'll just get rid of them. All right. If you look up guys like Sankara, Lumumba, all right, these are leaders that were basically taken out. One of them was killed by a guy that was close to them in their military, and the other guy was basically kidnapped and then murdered by the Europeans. But now the son of perdition is being revealed, and all of these narratives that the so-called white man was able to push out, that he's trying to restore democracy and, you know, he's removing the terrorists so that the people of that land can be free. That shit is not working anymore. All right. And eventually he's just going to have to take his mask off and be who he's always been. All right. But he's going to have to do it in public. All right. This is 2 Thessalonians chapter. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worship, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. All right, because when you deal with the law, statutes, and commandments, scriptures talk about equity. All right, but Esau's God is not the heavenly father. Esau's God is his belly. All right, the so-called white man's God is his appetite. All right, and he's willing to kill, steal, and whatever it takes in between to gain. All right, to cut. The scriptures talk about him coveting fields and taking them by violence. And sometimes that violence isn't physical. Sometimes it's literally the lies and slander, or paying some guy in this guy in another country to take out a leader that's trying to do right by the people. All right, the scriptures talk about a gift destroying the heart. That word gift goes into bribes. All right, it's Micah 2:2, and they covet fields and take them by violence, and houses and take them away. So they oppress a man and his house, even a man and his heritage. Which shows you they don't stop at just taking resources. They'll also take your identity. All right, and we've seen that play out throughout history. All right, so let me go back to this article because there was another point that I wanted to make with the original article. All right, from Gaddafi to Traore. I want to jump down. All right, here it is. It says Traore and the rise of African defiance. It says Captain Ibrahim Traore is not perfect. His country is fragile, beset by insurgency and economic hardship. But his stance against foreign military meddling, his defiant independence from France, and his clear tilt toward Africa First policies deserve applause. He is part of a broader movement sweeping through Mali, that's one of the other countries, Niger, Guinea, and other nations, a rejection of puppet regimes and a call for dignity. The Western media calls them juntas, but many Africans see them as the resistance. All right, and this is that parable that's being taken up all across the planet. From Moab, the so-called Chinese, to Ham, the so-called Africans. All right. And as a caveat, a lot of our people are on the west coast of Africa. That's where we were pulled from and brought over here to the Americas. All right. So you have our people mingled amongst the so-called Africans who are Hamites. Yet this is a global cry. All right. This is the Lord allowing these nations to rise up. All right. Matter of fact, let's go here. This is Habakkuk 2:6. Shall not all these take up a parable against him, and a taunting proverb against him, and say, woe to him that increaseth that which is not his? How long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay. Shall they not rise up suddenly that shall bite thee, and awake that shall vex thee? And thou shalt be for booties unto them? Because thou hast spoiled many nations, all the remnant of the people shall spoil thee. See, the world knows what's going on, all right? It's only people in the West that listen to Western media that don't really have a great idea of what's going on a political stage, the geopolitical stage, if you will. But the other nations know because they're privy to it. They're seeing it. You know, somebody blow up your whole family, and then you look at the metal from the missile and it say Raytheon. It don't take rocket science to figure out who's the evil in the world. It's just over here in the West where the so-called white man is able to push a narrative that a lot of people have been seduced by that narrative. But people in the world outside of Babylon the Great, which is America and the Western countries, they're aware of what's going on. That's why they're taking up this proverb against the so-called white man. All right. Whether it's South Africa, where they were kicking those so-called white people off land that was stolen anyway. And then the Americans tried to say that they were wrong for doing that. To their support for those small hats in the state of Israel and the massacre that they're doing, the attempted genocide that they're performing. The world is privy to who the so-called white man is, not who he's pretending to be. And that's why this proverb is beginning to become louder and louder. And eventually it's going to heat up to a physical war. The scriptures talk about World War III. All right, this is Habakkuk 2:8. Because thou hast spoiled many nations, all the remnant of the people shall spoil thee, because of men's blood, and for the violence of the land, of the city, and of all that dwell therein. Woe to him that coveteth an evil covetousness to his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of evil. Thou hast consulted shame to thy house by cutting off many people, and hast sinned against thy soul. And they use that so-called Negro as the general of AFRICOM. All right. And we all know, the so-called white man's tricks. All right. Put a black face on it. So, it don't look like it's him doing it, or he has some kind of distance away from the issue. All right. But we all know the play, and the world is waking up to the play. And that's why it's a beautiful time through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shema Shai. All right. Because this incident in itself points to a bigger incident or a bigger issue, which is that the so-called white man has ruled the nations in anger and treachery. All right. Whenever a righteous, so-called righteous leader stand up in one of these African countries, they automatically demonize them because that leader threatens their access to those resources, when the resources should be used for the benefit of those people, man. And this is why the scriptures say, woe to them that call evil good, man. There's nothing good about the so-called white man and the system he set up. It's a well-oiled, highly organized system of violence and criminal activity. Make no mistake. And now it's being called out. All right. This is Isaiah 14 and 4. All right. That thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon and say, how hath the oppressor ceased? All right. They haven't stopped. The golden city ceased. The Lord hath broken the staff of the wicked and the scepter of the rulers. He who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he that ruled the nations in anger is persecuted and none hindereth. No one's going to feel bad for the so-called white man falling out of power, because look at what he did with it. All right. Everybody suffered under his rulership, including his own people. All right. So Lord, matter of fact, because this all points to another issue concerning prophecy, is that everything is going to boil down to World War III. All of these little battlegrounds, Burkina Faso, Niger, all right, Mali, all these different areas, all right, Taiwan, all these different areas it's pointing to a bigger issue that's growing. All right. And that's that World War III. It's Revelation 11 and 14. The second war is past, meaning World War II. And behold, the third woe cometh quickly. All right, so with that, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakah Kodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yasha Allah, and a sincere salutation to all you Akim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwath, who are believing this word and all truth.